there, warm welcome. You're watching Decoding Now and I'm Meghna Deka. Well, the war may be winding down, but for India, the real story is just beginning. The guns may have fallen silent, but the cash registers could just start ringing. Well, Hormuz is now being mineswept. Fuel ships are lining up, oil prices are cooling down, and suddenly, the world's biggest energy choke point is now looking a lot less choke. So what does peace really mean for your pocket? Could your petrol get cheaper? Could India slash its import bill by $15 billion? And is this the moment when Chabahar goes from being a strategic asset to a strategic jackpot? Well, every $10 drop in crude can roughly shave up to $13 to $14 billion of India's annual fuel bill and improve the current account deficit. So tonight we are going to be decoding the India dividend from the Iran deal. From crude to Chabahar, from Hormuz to households, budgets, and why Beijing's string of pearls may just suddenly have a loose thread in it. Well, let's get you the numbers. Well, the reopening of Hormuz is the obvious economic highlight, though it will likely take weeks, if not months, for Gulf oil fields, refineries, depots to repair the damaged infrastructure, to clear the backlogs and resume normal production. Normalized oil flow will also depend on whether shipping and insurance firms trust the US and the Iran to stop fighting and drag the global energy trade into their war. It will also depend on demining the Hormuz. That's going to be very critical. But viewers, we are going to tell you as to why the Strait of Hormuz matters so deeply to the world and to every Indian household. Well, 1/5 of the world's oil passes through this narrow waterway. You can see that on your screens. For India specifically, 40% of our oil and up to 90% of our gas flows through here. The car that you drive, the food that you cook, the energy and electricity that you're using, all of it traces all the way back to this single choke point. That is how exposed India is to whatever happens in these waters. In fact, a smooth transit through the Strait of Hormuz means a stable, uninterrupted oil supply to the rest of the world and including India. In fact, the markets have already started responding. You can see that on your screens. Crude prices began cooling the moment news of the US-Iran peace deal broke. We are going to get you a comparison. Let's start from the day right before the war began. War began on the 28th of February. Let me tell you, on the 27th of February, one day before the war, the crude oil per barrel was $72.9 per barrel. Then in April 29th, US imposed a naval blockade on Iran. That's when the oil supply chain itself was disrupted. That's when we saw the prices go all the way up to 118 per barrel. By 15th of June, this was at a time when US and Iran's deal was officially announced. It was $83 per barrel. And as of today, which is the 18th of June, there's more optimism around the deal. After the US and Iran signed it virtually, you had the oil standing, the crude oil standing at 78 per barrel. So you can see how clearly sentiments of the oil markets have been directly impacted by geostrategic reasons. Meanwhile, viewers, reduced sanctions on Iran could reopen a historic energy partnership as well. Iran, remember, was once one of India's most significant oil suppliers. Before the US sanctions forced New Delhi to walk away, now with a peace deal on the horizon, that door may just be opening again. And here's why. Well, Iranian oil, you can see that on your screens, makes sense for India. First reason, additional source of crude oil, obviously, because we managed to diversify. We don't have to go to the only suppliers who are available. Now, Iran as a supplier of crude oil is available to India. It also means increased competition would lead to better pricing, of course. It's a clear bargain. It also reduces reliance on a single supplier. Let's say there is another Hormuz-like situation in future. You're not going to be dependent on one supplier alone, and you have diversified your imports. Crude quality, and that is very important. Iranian crude actually suits Indian refiners better. I'll tell you that in just a bit. Why? There are also geographic advantages for India because Iran is much closer than any of the other oil routes that India has, for example, Russia or Venezuela or US. The cost of supply is much cheaper if we just import it from Iran, which is closer. Also, the sixth reason, before the sanctions, Iran was one of India's top 3 suppliers of crude oil. Will we return to those days? Will we get a bargain? That's the question. Now, let's explain to you. A stable Middle East, why it matters beyond just the Hormuz. It's not only about the Hormuz. Remember, the UAE, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, key Indian oil suppliers, all of them have faced Iranian strikes, damaging their energy infrastructure. In fact, here's how you can see on your screens. There are crucial 3 nations which are very critical to India's oil needs. You have them on your screens. Iraq. Ahead of the war, 20% of India's oil imports were coming in from Iraq. Saudi Arabia, another one of the nations which fell prey to the drone strikes and the missiles of Iraq in the last 4 months. Saudi Arabia was giving India 13% of our oil imports. UAE, another one of the nations which was hit by Iranian drones and missiles, was giving India 9% of our oil imports as well. So a total of 42% of India's oil imports were coming from these 3 nations, and all 3 nations were being struck by Iranian missiles. If there is peace in the Gulf, it's a big win for India. Now, viewers, remember the peace deal. It brings a huge opportunity for India if both the sides honor the commitments. Only then. Because after all, cheaper crude can help India reduce its import bill. As per the experts, this can even help save India hold your breath, yes, you heard that right, $15 billion annually. Well, what's the math? Let's break it down for you. Every $1 fall, which happens in crude oil prices, India manages to save 1.5 billion per year. Get it? $1 fall in the crude oil prices, in Brent crude oil price that is, India manages to save $1.5 billion per year. Now that the drops have been much more drastic. Let's say that the fall in crude oil prices, because the war is over now, is by $10. There's a fall in the crude oil price, then India can save up to $15 billion per year. This is what the analysts are saying. So that is a win-win situation for India if we actually manage to save $15 billion on our import bills. But of course, there are lots of terms and conditions there. Meanwhile, let's not forget, at the end of it, it's not just hard math, the dollars, but also the human cost of war. This cannot be overlooked. 3 Indian seafarers, they lost their lives when US forces struck India-linked vessels in the Gulf. There are thousands more who have been stranded in the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman, caught in a conflict not of their own making. 13 India-flagged vessels, even as we speak, are there in and around the Strait of Hormuz. They now get freed. We are still awaiting for word from them. And on board these 13 vessels, there are 562 Indian sailors. There are 329 Indian sailors who are west of the Strait of Hormuz, and there are 233 Indian sailors who are in the Gulf of Oman. That's where these ships are. We are hoping that the sailors, the seafarers of India, return home safely. And anyways, there is, of course, relief on another front. Nearly 1 crore Indians call the Gulf home. That's right. The Gulf nations were under fire as well. With peace returning, safety now returns for these Indians as well. In UAE, there are 43.44 lakh Indians, strong Indian diaspora I should call them, who are there in UAE. Saudi Arabia has 27.5 lakh strong Indian diaspora. In Kuwait, there are 10.39 lakh Indians. In Oman, it is 6.79 Indian. In Qatar, it is 8.3 lakh. In Bahrain, there are about 3.2 lakh Indians. A total of close to 1 crore Indians are staying in these Gulf countries. If there is peace in the Gulf, it is the Indian diaspora which is definitely going to be impacted by it. There is, in fact, one more silver lining that I can tell you about. easing the sanctions in Iran could finally free up the Chabahar port. That is the economic. Can Chabahar go from being India's strategic foothold to being India's, what many are calling, jackpot? Well, quite possible. As we all know, Chabahar port is on the Arabian Sea and it is in Iran. The first reason, if Chabahar port takes off, the huge military advantage that India gets. Right now, it was on pause because of the war, but once it takes off, 170 kilometers from China's Gwadar port is what it is going to be. It is merely 170 kilometers from China's Gwadar port and gives us a huge strategic advantage. This may just be the counter to Xi Jinping and China's string of pearls that they have around the Indian Ocean. This could be India's strategic comeback to that. This is India's watchtower, literally India's watchtower on the Arabian Sea. The second reason, simply put, a cheaper transit which is available for India and the imports and the exports. Because it will ensure, once Chabahar is operational, for India, it will ensure that there are shorter routes for India and Russia to be importing Russian oil. In fact, it's going to be 40% faster for India to import oil from Russia. The transit time is going to be 40% faster, but also 30% cheaper, because simply put, it's a shorter route. So this is exactly what you have now on your screens. Is this going to be a win-win for India? In fact, let me go across to Zaha Jacob, our managing editor, who's joining us live from Paris. Yes, he's there. The Prime Minister is there. And a lot's been happening in geopolitics, Zaha, even as we speak. But all eyes are on the peace pact. There may be a real signing. We are not quite sure if that happens in Geneva or not tomorrow. But either ways, you must explain to us why it appears to be a win-win if there is peace all over across the Gulf. What does it mean for India? Break it down for us, Zaha.
We're here in Paris, where Prime Minister Modi will be attending a diaspora event. He will be addressing the diaspora in a few hours from now. But, you know, the question that you asked about the war finally ending, the peace agreement being signed between Donald Trump and Masoud Pezeshkian, who's the Iranian president, it happened not too far away from Paris, in the city of Versailles, the historic Palace of Versailles, where, of course, the World War I peace treaty was signed. Last night, Donald Trump having dinner with Emmanuel Macron, the French president, and Brigitte Macron, his wife. After the dinner, he signed on behalf of the United States of America this peace agreement, this memorandum of understanding. It's called the Islamabad Memorandum of Understanding, whereby America has conceded to these 14 points, which are part of this agreement. The chief one is about the nuclear question. Yes, Iran says it will not develop or acquire a nuclear weapon, but there is no certainty as far as no further enrichment is concerned. It does mention that Iran will dismantle the existing nuclear infrastructure, particularly the nuclear fissile material, about 400 kilograms of it, under inspections by the IAEA. But more importantly, on the question of war reparations or a war reconstruction fund, $300 billion is what America and its allies are committing to Iran. That's a big, big get for Iran. And two, Iran gets to also start now selling its #1 source of revenue, which is export of crude oil. It gets to go back to the international markets and to start selling Iranian crude legally. So all this business of shadow fleets and all of that will stop. As far as India is concerned, yes, this is a huge development, because remember, before the sanctions kicked in, about 2015-16 or so, Iran was one of the largest countries from where India was importing. It was within the top 5 import sources of crude oil as far as India is concerned. And then suddenly, after the sanctions came in, India just stopped Iranian crude almost overnight. Now India gets one more source of crude oil. Remember, 80% of India's crude is dependent on imports, and so you get one more source to try and diversify your import of crude. So this is a win-win, net win-win for India. There are 13 Indian ships, commercial tankers, that are still stuck in the Strait of Hormuz. They now have a 60-day window to come back home. They've been through this war over the last 3 months. I'm sure many of those sailors are tired and just want to get back home. So they have a 2-month, a 60-day window to get back home. And more importantly, after that 60-day window, Iran and Oman will have some kind of a joint mechanism mechanism whereby they will charge a nominal service charge or service fee for all the ships that transpass through the Strait of Hormuz. So as far as India is concerned, after the meeting that Prime Minister had with Donald Trump last night, he raised the issue of the seafarers. Now there is peace in West Asia. You've seen oil prices dip down to almost $75 a barrel. Donald Trump says it'll come back to where it was before the war began. So all in all, this looks net positive for India. And I think it's important to underline that now that this war is over and in this 60-day window, if both parties keep to their end of the bargain, we are now going back to a world as it existed before the 28th of February 2026.
Well, that is going to be the $15 billion question, isn't it, Zaka? What's going to be the world after this war? Well, many say perhaps never the same. Either ways, we are going to be wrapping up Decoding Now. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you again tomorrow, 6:30 p.m. right here on Timestamp.